Amy woke up feeling nauseous and puked her guts out after breakfast. And if you're thinking you might know why this is, I can assure you that you are 100% right. So last week, I told you guys about my relationship with Amy and how it started. I told you guys that we met in paralegal class, hooked up, and got into a relationship that became very serious very quickly. I told you about how magical the spring of 2009 was and how we were the happiest couple ever. I also told you about the revelation of Amy's infidelity and about how it absolutely destroyed me. Well, today, I'm going to give you guys the conclusion of this torrid whirlwind romance and how it ended up sending me to the unlikeliest of destinations which would change my life forever. Now, I know you guys want to hear about Amy's ex getting out of prison, but I need to first fill you in on why he was there, how he got there, and where he fits into a story that's so crazy one couldn't possibly make this up. So after I found out Amy had been cheating on me our entire relationship, my life began a downward spiral that very nearly could have ended my life. The fall and winter of 2009, I became completely unraveled. I fell into a deep depression, dropped out of paralegal school, developed a Coca-Cola habit, was taking illegal painkillers by the handful. I mean, it was bad. I lost my job and my car because it broke down and I didn't have the money to fix it. To make matters worse, my roommate kicked me out because I couldn't pay the rent. Having no place to go, I ended up living with a couple of Amy's drugged out friends. They were a couple who were both in their 30s and both on probation for felony possession. And as you can imagine, the party favors ran rampant in this household. That's part of the reason I developed the party favor habit. The other reason is because Amy was an experienced user herself, and this was even before I met her. So let's rewind about 6 months before I lost everything and to a particular day when I had a really bad migraine headache in class. So we're sitting in civil lit and Amy noticed that there was clearly something wrong with me. She had a look of great concern on her face because she had never seen me like this. I was usually pretty talkative in class, but on this day I was as silent as a church mouse and had my head in my hands to shield my eyes from the light, because when you have a migraine, bright lights will make it much worse. Headache, I said to her very slowly to keep from saying too much as it would make this debilitating migraine even worse. Amy reaches into her purse and pulls out a large white pill.
Take this,
she said. What's this? I asked.
It's a Vicodin,
she replied.
Take this and your headache will go away. I promise you.
Now, the only time I can ever remember taking a painkiller that had to be prescribed by a doctor was after I had one of my wisdom teeth removed. But what I did remember was how effective they were. But let's take a moment and think about this, guys. This 19-year-old girl was young, nubile, and appeared to be in perfect health, which was par for the course for most females her age. But never once did I think to myself, what's a 19-year-old doing with Vicodin in her purse? All I knew is that I wanted my headache to be gone. So I completely dismissed the fact that Amy was carrying around a bag full of Schedule II party favors. Well, when we fast forward to the fall, what happened in class explained why she had been using the H-word party favor all summer long. You see, Amy had scores of red flags that I had been completely blind to simply because she was pretty and was paying attention to me. Amy's upbringing is the quintessential example of a girl with daddy issues. Her mother gave birth to her at 15 years old, and her father left soon after. He'd come back into Amy's mother's life from time to time, but he spent most of his daughter's life in and out of prison. He was physically Ivisuba spelled backwards, had a drinking problem, and couldn't stay out of trouble with the law. Eventually, he disappeared just after Amy's 8th birthday and was never found. Amy's mother was stricken with grief because she feared the worst, and because of this, she started drinking heavily, lost her job, her car, her trailer home, leaving her and her young daughter homeless. Over the next couple of years, they bounced from house to house, living with family members and friends. But Amy's mother's proclivities to commingle with men who had substance abuse problems and criminal records got them evicted on more than one occasion. Eventually, they were taken in by a woman who is a longtime friend of Amy's grandmother, who had a 28-year-old son by the name of Ben. Ben immediately took on the surrogate father role and looked after Amy. He helped her with her homework, made sure she got to school on time, and took good care of her in the absence of her father. So for the next 3 years, this patchwork family appeared to be making it work. Amy's mother checked herself into rehab and finally got clean, Amy's grades started to improve, and Ben just landed a great job at a company that had a government contract. Everything seemed perfect until one morning, Amy woke up feeling nauseous and puked her guts out after breakfast. And if you're thinking you might know why this is, I can assure you that you are 100% right. But before I tell you about that crazy situation, let me remind you to like, comment, and share this video with anyone with a Y chromosome. I would also like to remind you that I will be breaking down the most popular dating show, The Bachelor, every Monday evening at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Sharpe Stream. SharpeStream is my own private streaming platform where I can speak freely without the concern of getting deplatformed. SharpeStream is available to all patrons $5 and up. So if you'd like to watch me break down this historic season of The Bachelor, which features a black man for the very first time, go to patreon.com/DonovanSharpe. Link in description. Okay, let's get back to my story. So Amy wakes up one morning and pukes her guts out. Now she has no idea why, but her mother most certainly did. And sure enough, Amy found out that she was 3 months pregnant. Even worse, Ben was the father. As you can imagine, Ben was arrested soon after, but what shocked everyone was that Amy was absolutely devastated. She had fallen in love with Ben. Now, the laws currently on the books dealing with this particular situation, which I'm not saying out loud for obvious reasons, requires a mandatory 25-year sentence. But because Amy's testimony somehow convinced the jury that the situation was not what it appeared to be, he was only sentenced to 6 years. His release date, September 16th, 2009, exactly 45 days after my 32nd birthday, which happened to be the day I found out Amy had been unfaithful, which brings me to the end point I left off last week. The day that Ben was supposed to be released, I broke up with Amy. She was crushed, but at the time I was resolute. I was still reeling from all that I had discovered about her, and I knew that there was no way I could handle Ben being around and what that situation had the potential to do. Amy cried and pleaded and begged me to reconsider. She assured me that she was no longer in love with Ben and that she loved me. I wanted to believe her, but I had seen and heard enough to realize she didn't know who she loved, if anyone at all. So I went home and tried to move on with my life, but I failed miserably. I tried to sleep, but I just couldn't. I tossed and turned all night long because I just couldn't get Amy out of my head. The thought that she might be hooking up with Ben at that very moment was just too much to bear. So the next morning, I called up a friend of mine, somehow talked him into letting me borrow $800, and went to the jewelry store to buy Amy an engagement ring. As soon as I bought it, I called Amy and told her to meet me at the gas station we used to go to in an hour. And right on time, she pulls up with a couple of friends of hers. She gets out of the car. I get down on one knee and asked her to marry me. True story, guys. I'm telling you, you cannot make this stuff up. I borrowed money from a friend I knew I would never pay back to buy a ring for a woman I knew I would probably never marry, and asked her to marry me. To my great relief at the time, she accepted. Her friends swooned with delight at their newly engaged friend who is now a bride-to-be. Well, the next couple of months were quite literally the worst 2 months of my life. As you probably have already guessed, Amy eventually started sleeping with Ben, and things couldn't be worse. When she got pissed off at me, she would go and sleep with Ben. When she was mad at him, she would come back to me. This love triangle continued until one night she was arrested for possession. Remember the party favor couple I talked about earlier that I would eventually end up living with? Well, they were the ones that ratted her out. I didn't know she was in jail until I got off work. Her bond, $13,000, which meant it would cost $1,300 to get her out. And between me, her mother, and Ben, we didn't have nearly enough to get her out. So once again, I pulled a rabbit out of my hat and managed to borrow $1,300 from another roommate of mine and got her out. Amy thanked me profusely and swore up and down that she was mine forever, until of course she started sleeping with Ben again. The devastation and heartbreak of this back and forth love triangle eventually took its toll. As I explained earlier, I neglected everything: my job, school, work, and eventually lost everything and ended up having to live with the very people who called the cops on Amy. And even then, the back and forth love triangle was still in full force until Thanksgiving night, when Amy called me to tell me that her and Ben were now engaged to be married. Although I knew this day would eventually come, I was still devastated. I was broke, homeless, drinking every day, doing party favors, Schedule 2 stuff, and now I didn't have Amy. This gentleman was rock bottom. But believe it or not, it actually got worse. So on the morning of New Year's Day in 2010, I was in an alcohol and party favor-induced haze when we hear a knock at the door. When one of my roommates answered, there was a short, bald Jamaican man standing there. I had no idea who he was, but they most certainly did. The man walks in the door, points directly at me, and says in a thick Jamaican accent, "You don't live here, and if you are not out of here by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, the sheriff is going to come and put you out." Having finally exhausted every resource I had access to, I called my brother and told him about my situation. He bought me a bus ticket to Atlanta, Georgia, where my mother and brother were living, sent $10 for me to eat on, and that was the last time I was ever a resident in the state of North Carolina. I wasn't really fond of living in Atlanta, having lived there before, and my second stint proved to be equally as disappointing. I knew I didn't want to stay in the ATL, but I had no idea where I wanted to go. I thought about Florida, maybe New York, but I was clueless about where to start the next chapter of my life. Well, a longtime friend I knew back when I was in college in North Carolina lived out in Vegas and had been trying to convince me to move out there for a few weeks. I'd never really considered living there because I didn't really think it was my kind of city. I mean, what could I possibly do in a city like Vegas? So one Saturday night, out of curiosity, I went to southwest.com to see how much a one-way ticket out there would be. I was in complete shock when I saw that the ticket was just $84. I sat there and stared at the screen thinking to myself, am I really about to do this? Am I really about to move all the way out to the West Coast? A few seconds later, I bought the ticket, not having any idea how this would turn out. And on July 10th of 2010, I landed in Las Vegas, Nevada, not realizing at the time that my life would be forever changed. When I think back to the terrible fall and winter that completely destroyed my life, I realize just how fortunate I was not to have been swallowed up by that armpit of a county in rural North Carolina. I could have been arrested because of the activity in the house I was living in. I could have gotten Amy pregnant. I mean, there were so many times where this situation could have gone completely sideways and severely and permanently wrecked my life. But only by the grace of whatever forces out there kept me from falling into this black hole was I able to escape that situation with my freedom and my life. People always wonder why and how I can speak with such conviction when I talk about relationships between men and women. And the reason is, I've had extensive experience. I've slept with more girls than I care to admit. I've been cheated on, cheated with. I've had pregnancy scares, love triangles. I mean, you name it, I've been through it. But the one relationship that did by far and away the most damage was the relationship I had with Amy. And to this day, I can freely admit that I have never loved anyone or anything as much as I loved her. Now, obviously, I feel much differently today. If I were to meet such a female these days, I'd have pulled a bang and bounce and I'd have been done with her inside of about 6 weeks, give or take. But the fact that I was able to emerge from that situation to not only survive, but to thrive and build what I have built today gives me a tremendous sense of pride. This is why I do what I do. This is why I tell my stories. This is why I teach men about the true nature of women. This is why I became Donovan Sharpe. Thanks for watching.